Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, investigators probing the Sewol-ho ferry sinking have arrested the president of the ferry operator on charges of homicide by negligence. The strengthening Korean won has many worried that local companies will lose their competitiveness overseas, and the won's strides against the greenback will hamper the export-led economy. Plus, a Thai court ousts Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra for abusing power, a move almost certain to trigger mass protests by her supporters. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Thursday, May 8th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Eojin Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with the latest on the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. It's now into the 23rd day of search operations.
Right. For the latest on the recovery operation and the ongoing investigations, we go live to our Connie Kim at the news center. Connie, fill us in.
Well, Mark and Jinju, today is Parents' Day in Korea, and at Pyeongmokhang Harbor, which is the closest land area to the accident site, the parents of the missing continue to wait for their children to return to them. Now, no additional bodies have been found since one victim was recovered Wednesday morning. Currently, the confirmed death toll stands at 269, with 35 still unaccounted for. The search efforts will continue in the front part of the sunken vessel's third floor, the central aisle, and the stern of the fourth floor. Now, early this morning at around 2:30 a.m., divers attempted to get inside the Sewol-ho, but high waves hampered their efforts and they had to suspend operations. The weather is expected to get better starting this afternoon, and the tides will be at their calmest at around 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Now, at that time, it's expected that divers will be able to retrieve more bodies from the water. Officials say the rescue team will attempt to comb through the 64 cabins once more, including restrooms, a cafeteria, and 47 other common areas. They'll also expand their search area to freight cars. Now, outside the ferry, the search will also expand. Authorities have announced that the search areas has increased to up to 80 kilometers from the accident site. So far, the rescue team has found 4 item belongings to victims, items like shoes and clothing on Chindo Island. With divers and rescue teams stretched to their limits, their health and well-being is a growing concern. Now, a 48-year-old Coast Guard official who fell ill during the search operations has regained consciousness, according to a local hospital in Mokpo. The man, known only by his surname Chung, lost consciousness yesterday after suffering from a migraine and leg paralysis. Chung was working at the site for the first time. Now, since the rescue operation started 3 weeks ago, 2 rescue personnel have died, one after bumping his head in the early stages of the rescue efforts, and a diver who died earlier this week.
Well, it really is an extremely difficult time down there for the search crews and the divers. They must be absolutely exhausted. Now, the investigations into this tragedy are ongoing. What's new on that front?
Well, Mark, a representative of the Cheongjin Marine Company, Kim Han-sik, was arrested earlier this morning on charges of homicide by negligence. The prosecution had issued an arrest warrant last night for Kim, who is now being transported down to the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office for questioning. And it seems it'll be difficult for Yoo Byung-an, the former Semo Group chairman and practical owner of the Cheongjin Marine Company, to avoid facing charges. The prosecution has reportedly uncovered evidence that links Yoo to the business operations of the company. Investigators at the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office have found an organizational chart which was used secretly among employees within the company, a chart that is different from the official organizational chart known to the public. Yoo formally denied overtaking any official positions within the company and having any company shares. Now, this chart suggests otherwise. Also, a 10 a.m. deadline for some of Yoo Byung-an's closest aides came and went at a little over 2 hours ago, with none showing up. One of those who were due to appear was Yoo's second son, who is abroad. He may now be forced into the country with the help of the FBI, and Yoo Byung-an and his first son may be summoned first. Also, Captain Lee Jun-seok and the Sewol-ho ferry's key crew members may face another charge for neglecting to answer an attendant's question on whether to direct passengers to get off the ferry. The joint investigation team will look into whether there were any technical problems and whether the captain and his crew members did not answer intentionally.
And Connie, this shouldn't have been repeated, but the number of survivors and the missing has been changed yet again. Tell us more about that.
Well, Jinju, the Coast Guard has once again changed its previous data of the rescued and the missing. The chief explained that they believe additional Chinese passengers were on board, with the rescued being adjusted from 174 to 172, and the missing passengers standing at 304 from 302.
The reason why the number has gone up is because we found credit card receipts from 2 Chinese nationals who weren't on the passenger list.
The problem here is that the Coast Guard has confirmed 2 additional passengers but did not release the increased number of missing passengers. So far, they have released the number of victims and not the missing, and said it has taken some time to track down the exact number of missing passengers. Well, this is all from me for now, but I'll be back with more updates in about 2 hours.
Now, the entire nation remains in a state of shock and grief over the Sewol-ho ferry sinking, more than 3 weeks after the vessel capsized.
But the place hit the hardest by the tragedy has been Ansan, the city that most of the victims called home. Arirang News' Shin Se-min reports on how the city is coming to terms with their grief.
A final trip around the school they once attended. For the 11th grade students of Danwon High School who died in the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy, this drive through campus in a slow-moving hearse signifies their last visit. Ribbons and countless notes adorn the fence outside the high school, letters and messages that read, "I'm sorry, please come home safely." It's hard to find anyone in the city of Ansan who doesn't know someone directly affected by the disaster.
I came here to see those kids enter school in funeral hearses. I have a grandson who is a senior and attends the school. It breaks my heart to think of the suffering the teens and their families are going through.
Gojandong is among the hardest hit neighborhoods in the city. The working class area, composed of simple brick apartment buildings, was home to 109 students that were on the ferry.
What used to be a bustling school zone filled with groups of teenagers has changed. Residents describe a stillness now brought on by the loss of a high school and loss of the city.
Grief has shrouded the city of Ansan, which has a population of 710,000 people. It permeates every corner of the community and has taken a toll on local business. Shop owners say they've seen a considerable drop in their number of customers. Shop owners say they've seen a considerable drop in their number of customers.
The area is grieving over the students who have died, such young students. It's completely understandable that sales have dropped.
The tragedy has brought this community together. The city's residents seek out comfort at a mass memorial hall in Parang Park, where they come to console one another. A sign that the tight community stands together in this most difficult time. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Speculation continues to swirl that North Korea is gearing up to make good on its threat and conduct a 4th and a new form of nuclear test. South Korea is taking the threat very seriously, but it also has a warning of its own. Any nuclear test will be met with severe consequences. Our Song Ji-san reports.
If Pyongyang pushes ahead with a 4th nuclear test and defies the international community, it can expect swift and strong punishment. This was the gist of the South Korean foreign minister's warning to North Korea when he said the regime would pay the heaviest price in new sanctions. Chairing a meeting at the UN Security Council on Wednesday, Yoon Byung-se said a test would have a huge impact on the strategic landscape in Northeast Asia and would pose a serious challenge to Beijing as well.
We must clearly warn North Korea that if it challenges the international community with another nuclear test, it will be met with the most serious consequences.
At the same time, Yoon stressed Seoul wants to build a peaceful and new Korean peninsula through President Park Geun-hye's reunification drive. but Pyongyang continues to verbally attack President Park's initiatives. The North Korean daily Rodong Shimun said Thursday that Park's ambition is only stirring the potential for war. It also says South Korean government was fooling the nation with a diabolical idea. Meanwhile, the U.S. confirmed Wednesday that Secretary of State John Kerry met with Wang Jia-rui, China's international director of the Communist Party. Wang, considered a key messenger between China's Communist Party and North Korea's Workers' Party, is believed to have discussed a possible resumption of the six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
The final verdict is in. The 3 unmanned aerial vehicles found on South Korean soil last month did in fact come from North Korea. A joint South Korea-US investigative team looking into the case released its final report on this Thursday, stating definitively that the 3 drones departed from the north and were headed back before crashing in South Korea. All 3 UAVs flew over key military facilities and took dozens of pictures, a clear violation of Korea's armistice agreement and the non-aggression pact, which forbids the North and South from infiltrating each other's airspace. South Korea's defense ministry plans to submit the results to the United Nations and said it will enhance air surveillance and come up with new strategies to prevent future infiltrations. Now, in yet another clear indication of the dire poverty in medical care most ordinary North Koreans are forced to accept, new data shows an unacceptable number of children in the country die before their 5th birthday. The Seoul-based Korea Development Institute said Thursday that 53 out of 1,000 North Korean children below the age of 5 died in 2012. That's up by 5 deaths compared to the year 2000. In South Korea, only 3 out of 1,000 children in the same age group died. The ratio of children with chronic malnutrition in the north has actually dropped sharply since 2000, but still stood at 28% in 2012. The professor who led the study says it's impossible to verify whether the nutritional status of North Korean children has improved that much, considering the increase in the number of young deaths.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin Ju.
I'm Jin Ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Today, May 8th, it's Parents' Day here in Korea, and while it's a day many Koreans spend time with their parents and thank them for bringing them up, this year hundreds of parents are aching with sadness after losing their children in last month's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Marking this day, President Park Geun-hye on her Facebook page vowed to make Korea a safe place to live so the parents of the victims will not be hurt anymore. The majority of victims from the sunken ferry were high school students from the city of Ansan traveling on a field trip to Jeju. President Park also thanked all parents in the nation for their sacrifices and devotion in raising their children and doing their best to foster talented individuals. And on the political front, the ruling and opposition parties are electing their respective floor leaders on this Thursday. The ruling Saenuri Party a couple of hours ago named its single candidate, Lee Wan-gu, new floor leader without a vote, alongside his running mate Chu Ho-young as the head of the party's policy committee. He's a member of faction close to President Park, while Chu is part of a different faction. As the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy heads to the polls this afternoon, the four-way race between lawmakers from different party factions is expected to determine the dynamics of party leadership. This follows the merging of the former Democratic Party and independent lawmaker An Cheol-soo's party in March. The Korean won's strength against the U.S. dollar is raising concerns among local exporters who stand to lose price competitiveness overseas. But as our Hwang Jae reports, it's the small and medium-sized enterprises that should be most concerned.
The Korean won continues to hover around its highest level in nearly 6 years, currently trading at the 1,020 level against the US dollar. Last month, the local currency strengthened more than 3% against the greenback, the biggest appreciation among the world's 40 major currencies. While experts predict the Korean won to remain strong for the time being, with the nation's current account balance remaining in the black for a prolonged period of time, they believe that the impact on local exporters will be limited.
I don't think it'll have that big an impact, but I do want to remind people that, well, during normal times, Korean won was always around $1,000 won per dollar. Right. Just before the Asian financial crisis, it was in the high 900s, and right before the global financial crisis, it was around 1,000. So it may be that the period we had for the last 4 years was sort of the abnormal period, and we were just getting back to normality.
Experts say what's really worrying are the small and medium-sized companies that are not fully prepared for the changes in exchange rates.
Well, the government, for the small and medium-sized companies, they instituted things like exchange rate insurance. Now, two problems. One is that it's not as widely known as it should be among small and medium-sized enterprises, so they don't take advantage of it. And then the second problem is the amount that they set aside for it may not be enough to cover a lot of the SMEs. So that program and other programs designed to hedge against exchange rate changes should be made larger, and it should be advertised more.
With concerns lingering that the economic growth could be hurt by slowing private consumption due to the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, coupled with the strong local currency, the government has announced it will hold an emergency meeting led by President Park Geun-hye on Friday. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The stresses and strains of modern life make some people seek a release in the form of alcohol or cigarettes. But latest figures show that more Koreans are turning away from smoking, but they are spending more of their money on alcohol. Statistics Korea says the percentage of a household's monthly expenditure on cigarettes has tumbled year after year for almost a decade now. Korean households spend around $17 a month on tobacco last year, about 0.7% of their total monthly spending, and that's down sharply, in fact, from 2008. Households spent slightly over $10 a month on alcoholic beverages last year a month, which is over 0.4% of their monthly outgoings. The corresponding figure in 2008 was in the 0.3% range. Now, there are heightened concerns of fresh political turmoil in Thailand today, one day after Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra was ousted by the country's constitutional court. Yingluck's supporters have turned out in force to defend her, while her opponents say they will keep pushing for reforms. Connie Lee has this report.
About 1,000 anti-government protesters joined in on a march in Bangkok on Wednesday, welcoming the verdict that forced Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra to step down.
She has never shown any responsibility as Prime Minister. She should have left a long time ago. I'm so happy that the court acted justly.
The anti-government protesters weren't alone on the streets, though. Supporters of the ousted Prime Minister also gathered and said there would be no political vacuum in her absence. Her supporters are planning a mass rally on the outskirts of Bangkok this weekend, in an area where anti-government protesters have also staged rallies. It's raising concerns of violent clashes. The U.S. has called for a peaceful solution to the current crisis, suggesting elections and elected government. Thailand's Commerce Minister has been appointed the acting Prime Minister until elections can be held, likely sometime in July. Thailand's Constitutional Court ousted Yingluck and 9 cabinet members on Wednesday for abuse of power. The ruling follows 6 months of political deadlock and represents a victory for Yingluck's detractors, who have been trying to get her out of office. The ousted Prime Minister, at a press conference after the ruling, denied any wrongdoing.
I insisted that we have used honesty to administer the country, and we have never done anything that conveys any dishonest actions as accused.
Yingluck's legal troubles aren't yet over. The country's National Anti-Corruption Commission is expected to hand down a verdict later this month. And if Yingluck is found guilty, she faces a 5-year ban from politics. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now, for a look at some of the other international headlines we're following at this hour, let's turn to our Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news center.
Eunice, Ukraine has been inching closer and closer to a violent fraction, but Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested what could be a possible concession.
Right. In a decidedly new tone, Putin has called on pro-Russian rebels in Ukraine's east to postpone a secession vote planned for this coming Sunday, and said he's also pulling Russian troops back from the border. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
There are fresh signs that Russian President Vladimir Putin is making attempts to de-escalate tensions in eastern Ukraine.
We call on the representatives of southeastern Ukraine, the supporters of the federalization of the country, to postpone the referendum planned for May 11th.
Putin's call comes just 5 days before a secession vote was scheduled by pro-Russian rebels in 2 provinces Ukraine's east. Analysts believe the separatists will heed Putin's request. It represents a potential breakthrough in a crisis that has plunged relations between Moscow and the West to lows not seen since the Cold War. The U.S. and European Union had been threatening to impose even tighter sanctions on Russia if it interfered with Ukraine's general elections scheduled for May 25th.
We have sent an unmistakable message to Russia. Your behavior doesn't belong to the 21st century. And your rhetoric draws on outdated cliches of the Cold War.
President Putin also announced that he will pull Russian troops from the Ukrainian border, although NATO and the U.S. say there have been no signs to indicate that a withdrawal has begun.
Russia has been escalating this crisis from the start. Russia should live up to its international commitments and obligations, stop supporting separatists, and pull back its troops from Ukraine's borders, so that a political solution can finally be found to this grave crisis.
The tensions in eastern Ukraine have raised the prospects of a civil war between pro-Russian factions in the east and pro-Europeans in the west. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And security concerns are overshadowing the 3-day World Economic Forum in Africa, which launched in Nigeria's capital city of Abuja yesterday, amidst new reports of more violence. News of a 12-hour assault in the northeastern border city of Kamburu-Nagala belatedly surfaced as local media reported Islamic militants believed to belong to Boko Haram indiscriminately attacked an outdoor market on Monday using improvised bombs and rocket-propelled grenades. As many as 300 people are feared dead. Meanwhile, Nigerian police are offering a $300,000 reward for information that leads to the rescue of the more than 200 missing schoolgirls. This as help is coming from the U.S., the UK, and France. Paris said it is sending security service agents there. London will send a team of experts to work with the U.S. team that will establish a coordination cell at the U.S. Embassy for support in intelligence investigation and hostage negotiations. And the United States says it is concerned about the latest escalation of tensions in the South China Sea, calling Beijing's deployment of an oil rig in a disputed region as provocative and unhelpful. The disputes began on Sunday near the Parcel Islands, where Vietnam had been fending off a Chinese oil rig project. The Vietnamese Coast Guard said about 80 Chinese military and civilian vessels moved into the area, rammed into its ships repeatedly, and fired water cannons, injuring some 6 officers. Separately, Philippine police took into custody Chinese fishing boats holding hundreds of sea turtles caught on the disputed Spratly Islands. Spokeswoman Jen Psaki from the U.S. State Department urged restraint from all sides.
The light rain from this morning has let up in most regions and afternoon sun is on the way. But today's highs will be a tad lower than yesterday. That's due to strong gusty winds, which will make us feel chillier than actual temperatures. So be sure to dress accordingly. And over in Jindo, the winds and waves should come down a bit in the afternoon. But remember, we're still in the middle of the nip tide period, during which time tighter currents slow down. And this is the weather outlook for here in Seoul. Temperatures will hover near the seasonal norms with a fair amount of sunshine, but nationwide showers this Sunday will drop temperatures a few notches. So please do keep that in mind, and let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 21, Daegu will peak at 24, while Gwangju and Busan climb to 21 and 23 respectively. For other regions, it looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon will reach 20. Dokdo should see a high of 15, while Mount Keungang tops out at 9. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning.
Well, thank you very much for the weather there, Jian, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.